The quest for the Grail is not archaeology. It's a race against evil. If the Nazis capture the Grail, the armies of darkness will march all over the face of the earth. There are precisely two good Indiana Jones films, and this is one of them. The Last Crusade should have been The Last Crusade, if you know what I mean. Let's start with the fabulous opening scene and River Phoenix' dead-on portrayal of a young Indy. The scene explains how he got the scar on his chin, where he got his whip, and how he got his trademark hat. You lost today, kid, but that doesn't mean you have to like it. Then there's the plot. I defy you to conceive of a better storyline than this film boasts. Indiana Jones must find and rescue his father from the Nazis. Nazis. I hate these guys. How did you know that she was a Nazi? The Nazis? Is that the limit of your vision? And proceed to overcome femme fatale Elsa Schneider. You said go between them! And his own religious skepticism, all the while thawing the icy relationship he has with his father. Attila, the professor, he never was giddy, even when he was a schoolboy. You laughed just when you were becoming interesting. To recover the Holy Grail so that he can ultimately save his father's life and perhaps his own soul. Oh, and lest we forget, Indy comes face to face with Adolf Hitler himself. I think this is easily the funniest and most quotable of the Indiana Jones franchise, with a lot of that owing to the surprising chemistry between and performances of Harrison Ford and Sean Connery. An odd pairing that manages to make a believable and lovable father-son duo. I'm as human as the next man. I was the next man. Indy and his father Henry end up making a great team on this adventure, as Henry's devout religious beliefs and knowledge of Grail lore are not particular strengths of Indy's, and Indy's problem-solving and fighting skills aren't Henry's forte. In the end, though, there are some really fun reversals, as Henry employs some of his son's cunning and improvisation to liberate himself and Marcus. You didn't drag poor Marcus along, did you? He's not up to the challenge. From the German Panzer. And in the end, of course, skeptic Indy proves to possess more religious knowledge and faith than presumed, as he overcomes each of the traps, including the highly symbolic leap from the lion's head. This is yet another film that I turn to in difficult times, as it never fails to make me feel better. 42 of you voted for The Matrix, which was more than enough to take down one of my all-time favorite films. You know that I have to say it, right? You chose poorly. And this is how we say goodbye in Germany, Dr. Jones.
The Han Solo creature wasn't working for me, so I had Phil Tippett create a puppet.
Return of the Jedi is the thrilling conclusion to George Lucas' original Star Wars trilogy. After blasting off with Star Wars and soaring to new heights with The Empire Strikes Back, the role of Jedi was to stick the landing. I don't know, fly casual. It didn't need to expand or revolutionize. It needed to chase down every loose thread and tie them up. And I think that's what we love about Return of the Jedi. The proverbial hero's journey culminates in a satisfying finish, including the biggest space battle yet, with more models and more complexity, including Luke's emotional confrontation with his father and the evil Emperor, including the answers to questions we formulated along the way. Do we trust Lando now? I don't trust Lando. Did Obi-Wan mislead Luke? A certain point of view? Will Luke suffer the same fate as Obi-Wan's apprentice? As usual, the film begins in medias res as the opening act returns us to where it all began on Tatooine, and all the chess pieces move onto the board of Jabba's palace. I used to live here, you know. You're gonna die here, you know. Convenient. I love that Jedi took us to a biome thereto unseen in Star Wars, and that is the forest moon of Endor. We got to see forest speeders, forest troopers, and kid favorite forest creatures, the Ewoks. It's against my programming to impersonate a deity. By this point, Star Wars is a well-oiled machine. ILM's effects work is masterful. Creatures like the Rancor are brought to life in terrifying detail. Vader's Force sense allows him to learn that the shuttle Tydirium is a Trojan horse, yet he lets it slip through the Empire's defenses, opening a window into his character. From the beginning, the plot is controlled by the usually unseen Emperor Palpatine, whose dark side skills make him nearly omniscient, which is why he controls the plot. He knows the exact cards he needs to play to lure the rebellion into an ill-advised attack, and Luke Skywalker to replace Darth Vader as his apprentice. It's a trap! He doesn't account for the bond between Luke and Vader, though, which is where this movie transcends all the space magic and touches audiences as a familiar and universal story about family. At their heart, episodes 4, 5, and 6 are an opera about a family spread across the stars and the galactic conflict required to bring them back together. Star Wars is irreplaceable in my childhood. I remember Brennan and I watching them for the first time. We discovered some VHS tapes in our grandmother's basement, and we were awestruck. We probably didn't watch them in order, which is fantastic. The less you know about what's going on, the more fun it is to try to figure it out. Episode 6? We were amazed. Margins were razor thin on this one, The Sandlot beating Return of the Jedi, 37 to 36 votes.
That was a little too close.
That's right. I still have my Star Wars toys.
1997's Good Will Hunting is a drama written by and starring Matt Damon and Ben Affleck. Early in the film, Will and his friends initiate a fight with a group of young men solely because one of them used to beat up Will in kindergarten. The more I thought about this scene, the more I realized how many functions it serves. It advances the plot, obviously, because the fight lands Will in trouble with the law and at the mercy of the courts, which ultimately places him within the orbit of Professor Lambeau, and then therapist Sean Maguire, played by Robin Williams. But the fight also illustrates that Will's friends will do just about anything for him. Only Morgan, played by Casey Affleck, needed any sort of prodding to join the melee, and that only because he wanted to first eat his cheeseburger. Unbeknownst to these friends, their devotion serves as one of Will's primary defense mechanisms. Will has carefully surrounded himself with ultra-loyal friends who will only protect him, never hurt him. Finally, the fight displays a rage that burns within Will, and this is the first indication that he has some sort of inner demons and a troubled past. The film is partially about class distinctions and is a portrayal of the enmity that exists in Boston between the Ivy Leaguers and the working class. So this is a Harvard bar, huh? One of the film's most memorable and enjoyable depictions of class enmity occurs when an arrogant Harvard graduate student humiliates Chucky's obvious lack of education in front of Skyler, played by a Minnie Driver. Will intervenes and easily turns the tables on the guy, revealing him to be a fraud. Well, I got a number. How you like them apples? As amusing and satisfying as this scene is, though, Will later receives an undressing even more incisive and devastating at the hands of therapist Sean, who sees past all of Will's bravado and attempts to project a confident, strong image. Maguire's monologue revolves around one of the film's major themes, the importance of lived experience, and how no amount of reading or intellect can suffice as a substitute. Good Will Hunting contains this and other fantastic, compelling monologues delivered by brilliant characters such as the aforementioned Sean, but also from simple, salt-of-the-earth characters like Chucky, illustrating that insight and wisdom aren't the exclusive domains of the educated. Throughout the film, people try to convince Will that he has some sort of obligation, whether that obligation is to humanity at large, which is the case that Professor Lambeau makes, or to himself, to make the most of the gifts that he's been given. What ultimately seems to hit home hardest, though, is the speech delivered to him by his best friend Chucky, who says that Will's obligation is actually to him, and to all those who, like him, would kill to have what Will has. As much cursing as the film contains, it contains even more humanity and heart. The film is ultimately about two men facing the pain of the past and embracing the possibilities of the future. Will and Sean help each other do exactly these things, and both of them ultimately venture beyond their respective defense mechanisms, vowing, in Sean's case, to put his chips back on the table and see what kind of cards he's dealt, and in Will's to go see about a girl. And this is, I think, why the film is so loved. We all want to believe that we too can pursue a hopeful future no matter how painful our past. Good Will Hunting is an inspiring film with terrific acting and writing, but it collected only 25 of the 73 available votes, going down to the much beloved Princess Bride.
Let me give you a nickel's worth of free advice. No McFly ever amounted to anything in the history of Hill Valley. Yeah, well, history's gonna change. Can you change your destiny? Or that of your family? It's heavy stuff, Doc. Back to the Future is a buoyant misadventure with sci-fi elements that don't take themselves too seriously. Stuffed with 50s and 80s Americana, this Robert Zemeckis classic strikes a balance that makes it eminently rewatchable. Christopher Lloyd is brilliant as the slightly mad Professor Emmett Doc Brown, a millionaire tinkerer who invents the flux capacitor and accidentally sends Marty on a time-traveling quest to fix his family with the power of love. Marty McFly is a rebellious everyman set on self-determination. And in the same way that he's a little rough around the edges as a teen, he proves that you wouldn't want to meet your parents at the same age. He finds that he gets his rebelliousness from his mother and his loser cred from his father, eccentrically rendered by Crispin Glover. Last night, Darth Vader came down from the planet Vulcan and told me that if I didn't take Lorraine out, that he'd melt my brain. My density has brought me to you. His parents' character flaws make it all the harder for Marty to ensure that they meet and fall in love, and if they don't, he won't be able to return back to the future. I have to mention Tom Wilson's fantastic performance as the bully, Biff Tannen. So why don't you make like a tree and get out of here? I think we all want to believe that we can change our futures for the better, and that's the gift of Back to the Future. Voters were deadlocked on this one, but in the end, Back to the Future was defeated by the Fellowship of the Ring, 36 to 37 votes. Do you know what this means? It means that this darn bracket doesn't work at all!
William Wallace killed 50 men. 50, if it was one. 1995's Braveheart, starring Mel Gibson, is an iconic war film that is light on historical accuracy but heavy on enthralling battle scenes. This score, composed and conducted by James Horner and performed by the London Symphony Orchestra, is legendary, and I still occasionally listen to it for inspiration. Why is this film important to me? In college, I belonged to a social club called Chi Lambda Phi, and we considered ourselves to be sort of honorary Scotsmen, which I acknowledge was pretty silly. But I remember how sacred Braveheart was to us and have some wonderful memories of wearing my fake kilt around the OC campus and using my questionable Scottish accent on unsuspecting waitresses. The film's hero, William Wallace, is not only a gifted swordsman and battle tactician, he's also a talented orator who delivers an impassioned, iconic speech to his outnumbered countrymen before the Battle of Stirling. He says, "Fight and you may die. And dying in your bed many years from now, would you be willing to trade all the days, from this day to that, for one chance, just one chance, to come back here and tell our enemies that they may take our lives, but they will never take our freedom?" This speech is so stirring and motivational, in part because it strikes at the very core of humanity. What is the goal of life? To live as long as one can, to simply mark time, or to live as fully as one can, even if that means risking an early death? And some things are worth dying for. It's also worthwhile and interesting to me to explore Wallace's motivation for doing what he does. He claims that it's all about the pursuit of freedom for him and his kinsmen. But his best friend Hamish challenges this notion, saying that's really about his wife Marin, who is killed by an English lord. And lest we forget also that William's father and brother died early on, victims to the English as well. To me, this exchange between Hamish and William begs the question of whether any of us really pursue some ideal purely for its own sake, or if there's always going to be something personal that's really driving us. One of the film's dichotomies is that of prudence, embodied by the so-called Scottish nobles, versus heroism, embodied obviously by Wallace and his followers. And so one of the film's most interesting characters, Robert the Bruce, stands at the crossroads of this dichotomy. He is a contender for the Scottish crown, but his belief in adhering to the status quo is shaken as he is inspired by the passion and deeds of Wallace, whose legend grows. His ailing father can sense this tension in the Bruce as he says, "You wish to charge off and fight as he did, eh? So would I." His father acknowledges the appeal of heroism, but is a pragmatist at heart and reminds his son that his forebears acquired titles and land by condoning English rule. The Bruce, who also serves as the narrator of the film, ends up pulling a bit of a Judas Iscariot move by betraying Wallace to his enemies, a decision he bitterly regrets that ultimately sends him on a redemptive arc. Braveheart falls in the end, though, to Edward the Shawshank Redemption.
Snakes. Why did it have to be snakes? Asps. Very dangerous. You go first. Adventure has a name. Indiana Jones. Before Paramount knew that Indiana Jones could carry other movies, and before they slapped his name on the title, this picture was simply called Raiders of the Lost Ark. Raiders, in a word, is iconic. Take, for example, the character of Indiana Jones, that sable fedora-wearing, whip-wielding, platonic ideal of masculinity. Or the masterful action sequences, filled with stunts and practical effects, tearing through period-specific set pieces. Or the thrilling John Williams score. Its theme really is adventure, a treasure hunt with global stakes. Find the lost Ark of the Covenant, or bow before an unstoppable Nazi army with the power of God. Indy uses all forms of transportation available in 1936, including horse, to travel to exotic locations and recover the lost Ark of the Covenant before it falls into the wrong hands. In this Lawrence Kasdan written, Lucas-Spielberg collaboration, there are heroes and villains. There are vehicle chases and creepy crawlies, there's romance and comedy. Raiders of the Lost Ark hits every note. It's exciting, intriguing, uplifting, and that's what makes it an all-time classic. Raiders vs. The Dark Knight was contentious and may have fallen along generational lines, but in the end, The Dark Knight sped away with 55% of the vote. It's not the years, honey. It's the mileage. Bad dates.
That's no moon. It's a space station. A New Hope is widely regarded as one of the most significant and consequential films in the annals of cinema. I've got a bad feeling about this. A New Hope won Oscars for Best Costume Design, Best Film Editing, Best Original Score, Best Production Design, Best Sound Mixing, and Best Visual Effects. It grossed $775 million, making it the highest grossing film ever until the release of E.T. 5 years later in 1982. This film is important to me because it was so central to my youth and to my family. I remember being awestruck and mesmerized by it the first time I saw it on the screen when my family lived in Hays, Kansas. In fact, I recall my father saying that what I was watching was called Star Wars, and that was one of my earliest memories in life. My brothers and I used to stage lightsaber duels in our unfinished basement, and sometimes in our backyard at nighttime, when the bright colors of our plastic weapons shone the brightest. Not as clumsy or random as a blaster, an elegant weapon for a more civilized age. This film delivers all the goods. Darth Vader is one of the most terrifying and iconic villains ever, and he is voiced to absolute perfection by the one and only James Earl Jones. I find your lack of faith disturbing. The space battles were visually groundbreaking at the time and required no small amount of ingenuity and creativity to make them a reality. It's easy to fall in love with the trio of heroes, and this is the film when their narrative arcs begin. A New Hope is also full of wonder. Viewers are introduced to the concept of the mysterious force and the idea that there are special people who can manipulate it for either good or for evil. There are also some wonderful and surprising moments of levity. Don't call me a mindless philosopher, you overweight glop of grease. With the elimination of A New Hope and Return of the Jedi, it falls to the franchise's finest film, The Empire Strikes Back, to carry the mantle.
Simplicity. Read Marcus Aurelius. Of each particular thing, ask what is it in itself? What is its nature? These are Hannibal's instructions to Clarice, the method for finding Killer at Large Buffalo Bill. So what is Silence of the Lambs? What is its essence? I think what we love about Silence of the Lambs as an audience is its tense, thrilling scenes, especially those between Jodie Foster's FBI trainee Clarice and Anthony Hopkins' psychiatrist-turned-convicted killer and cannibal, Hannibal Lecter. Clarice does not play into her femininity to get what she wants from her misogynist colleagues, but Lecter demands that she expose herself psychologically to him in a dangerous game of quid pro quo. She lets him into her mind, and he helps her catch the other killer. It's the intelligent mind that tends to fracture, and Silence of the Lambs shows us just how disturbing that can be in the character of Hannibal Lecter. I tend to forget the Buffalo Bill sections of this movie because it's Clarice and Lecter that is most fascinating. This sophisticated thriller and 3-seed is easily defeated by 2-seed The Empire Strikes Back, which grabbed 70% of the vote.